Depression is omnipresent among people with disabilities. It's interwoven in their daily lives. They breathe, sleep, and work with it as if it were natural. The fight for accessible public transportation seems to have been the crucible for the disability rights movements for much of the last 2 decades. Advocates thought that accessible transportation would be the key to free disabled people and to mainstream them in society. When the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act passed, mandating that all public buses and trains be made accessible, Americans with Disabilities celebrated this new legislation. The Americans with Disability Act guarantees that people with disabilities have the same access to public services such as transportation as people without disabilities. To make bus service available to those with disabilities, many city transit authorities have equipped their buses with wheelchair lifts and other special devices. Public transit authorities also provide ADA paratransit service for those disabled persons who are unable to travel using the fixed route bus service. The ADA paratransit service provides both curb-to-curb service and door-to-door services. The spirit of the ADA is all about equal access and leveling the playing field so that disabled persons no longer have to sit on the sidelines. But 21 years after the law was passed, we still see horror stories of a well-intended plan that sometimes goes horribly wrong. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines to share one of those horror stories in American Disability Act Problems' Florence Kulb story, and to expose where the ADA's paratransit program went wrong in Philadelphia, and how Florence Kulb's lawyer, Robert Huber, partner at Huber and Palser, successfully represented Florence to get her the justice she deserved. Robert's goals, not only to get justice for Florence, but to make sure that similar incidents don't ever happen again anywhere in America. Robert Huber has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best people's trial lawyers in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and in America. He has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. In 2009, he was chosen as the co-chair-elect of the Philadelphia Bar Association's Workers' Compensation Section. He is serving on its executive committee for the 2009-2011 term. His dedication to representing injured workers, knowledge of the law, and reputation within the legal community, and his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Philadelphia at the law firm of Huber and Palser. It is my great pleasure to introduce Bob Huber to the show. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Tell our audience about this case.
Florence's case is one of the most interesting cases that I've ever handled, and it's a very sad case, one in which she was seriously injured when she was unassisted by the paratransit service that was supposed to be helping her get in and out of the vehicle as she left her dialysis treatment.
Right, and for our audience, paratransit is for people who are unable to catch a regular bus line. It's usually a contractor or somebody who has a contract with the city where they come out to their house and they pick them up. And I understand they have 2 types of service that are recommended by physicians or prescribed by physicians, either door to door or curb to curb. And Florence had door-to-door type service, didn't she?
She did have door-to-door service, and that door-to-door service is something that was ordered by her physician.
Yes. What happened with this door-to-door service and this paratransit service?
The driver knew that she was supposed to have this type of assistance out of the car.
Yeah.
And instead of helping her out of the car, he just told her to get out. She was weak from dialysis,
yes,
and with her first step out of the car, she fell to the ground, fracturing her leg. He just left her lying there afterwards.
Drove away?
Drove away.
Yeah. Now, prior to this time, Florence could move around pretty good, walk around, right?
She was able to get around by herself. She did have a cane that she needed to get around with, but actually her left leg, which is the leg that was injured in this case, was her good leg before this accident.
As a result of the injury of her leg, what happened to her eventually?
She eventually had to have her leg amputated below the knee.
Right. And so now she's wheelchair bound, isn't she?
She is wheelchair bound, and she's unfortunately been living in a nursing facility ever since.
How did this case come to you?
It came to me through a family friend of Florence's I'd represented in the past.
Right. When you first discovered the story, what were your immediate response to it?
I knew it was a serious case, and I was very concerned for her because she's diabetic.
Yeah.
And my concerns were that ultimately she could lose a leg, so I wanted to make sure that I preserved all the evidence.
What was your legal strategy then?
My legal strategy was to put everybody on notice, including the paratransit company, Philadelphia Coach Paratransit Division, and Logisticare, which was the transportation broker.
That was, Logisticare was the contractor with the city, right?
The contractor with the Department of Public Welfare, correct.
Right. And then they subcontracted out to other companies.
They did.
And they subcontracted to the paratransit company, which was named what?
Which was named Philadelphia Coach Paratransit Division.
Who is no longer a business, right?
They're no longer in business as a direct result of this case.
Okay, when you say put everybody on notice, what does that mean to our audience?
It means that I wrote to each of those defendants to notify them of the fact that this accident had happened, and that I wanted them to preserve all the evidence pertaining to the trip logs and to who the name of the driver was.
Right, and in your discovery process, what did you discover?
I discovered that they didn't even know who the driver was.
It's amazing. They couldn't identify whether they were a man or a woman, correct?
They couldn't. Their trip logs said that it was a woman, and Mrs. Kulb and her son, who witnessed the accident, both said it was a man.
Right. What was the defendant's position when you sued them?
The defendant's position...
Because there were 3 defendants, weren't there?
There were more than 3.
Okay.
But yes, there were 3 corporate defendants and several individual defendants. The Logisticare defendants took the position that their independent contractor, or who they called an independent contractor, Philadelphia Coach Paratransit Division, was solely responsible for the accident.
Right.
Philadelphia Coach Paratransit Division then took the position that their independent contractor drivers were solely responsible for the accident and that they had no liability whatsoever.
Yes, and that was everybody's kind of position. But you quickly discovered that even Philadelphia Coach, who was supposed to have $1 million liability insurance, never had the insurance to begin with, didn't they?
They never had it at all.
So how did you bring everybody together and settle this case?
Well, in Pennsylvania, as in most states, there's agency law which exists. And Logisticare had hired Philadelphia Coach Paratransit Division to be their agent, and therefore they were responsible for the actions of their agent.
Right. So no matter what their agent did, because of the laws in Pennsylvania, I mean, their lawyers knew this, didn't they?
Oh, they did.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that's why we were able to bring everybody together and settle the case.
One of the key people that and you did settle the case, but one of the key people that you used as an expert witness, who's an expert in this area of law, is Ned Einstein, correct?
Correct.
And he is the president of Transportation Alternatives. He's up in New York, isn't he?
He is. He's in New York City.
He makes it his business to primarily see to it that paratransit organizations and people that help folks like this live up to the letter of the law, if you will, live up to their contract.
In fact, he's done that all over the nation,
and
he's one of the leading experts. He was fantastic.
I found his deposition, his video deposition, so important and so relevant that we are going to include it in the show because he kind of summarizes what also went on in this case, and I'm going to show that right now.
I'm the president of a firm called Transportation Alternatives in New York City. I'm a safety consultant and a forensic expert primarily, and I've had a 35-year career in transportation. Of those 35 years, I spent 32 of them partly or largely in the paratransit field. and that included directing my own 70-vehicle paratransit operation for a period of 10 years. As you know, the plaintiff was a 53-year-old semi-ambulatory cane user with diabetes, end-stage renal failure, and a not yet healed broken foot. When the incident occurred, she was returning in a weakened state from having her blood cleansed from a 4-hour dialysis treatment. From the deliberate failure to provide passenger assistance, she fell during her first or second step out of the vehicle, and as a result, she experienced multiple fractures of her left ankle, required multiple surgeries, and eventually her lower left leg below the knee had to be amputated completely. The plaintiff was denied door-to-door service literally as a formality. This denial did not even save any money for Logisticare or its service provider or its funding agency. Logisticare was not prohibited from providing door-to-door service, and its driver failed even, as noted, to assist the plaintiff from her vehicle on her return trip from dialysis treatment. Her weakened condition from dialysis treatment is not only a universally acknowledged standard among people in the non-emergency medical transportation field, but deponents of both co-defendants acknowledged knowing this. In contrast, the transportation director, who was soon elevated to become general manager, in other words, the individual who basically ran the entire operation for Logisticare, before being hired by Logisticare, had not spent a moment of his life in any way involved in the passenger transportation field. In fact, he had never even been a driver. He was patently unqualified for this position, yet he was in charge of this entire operation, an operation that obtained tens of millions of dollars in revenue every year. In summary, a tragedy like that, which was experienced by the plaintiff, essentially a catastrophic and needless accident, was basically inevitable given the reckless conduct and the persistent indifference displayed by both co-defendants. A patently unqualified service provider could have been molded at least into a marginally effective and reasonably safe one had Logisticare honored its promises to the Department of Public Welfare as it agreed to in its proposal and in its contract. The reality is the sweeping range and diversity of Logisticare's errors and omissions, fraud, and misrepresentation, occurring within the context of an enormous scope of operations nationally, including operating non-emergency medical transportation in 14 states, demonstrates that its operations are nothing but a sham.
So he was a considerable resource for you, wasn't he?
Mr. Einstein was the best resource I had in the entire case.
Would you say that that was one of the main reasons why everybody settled?
I would say so, and the fact that he'd actually had cases against Logisticare in the past gave great insight to what they had done in the past and what they had done in this case.
What are the paratransit door-to-door guidelines when we're talking about curb-to-curb, door-to-door? What are these guidelines?
Those guidelines are very important, and they will spell out exactly the type of service that the individual is supposed to get.
Okay.
In either case, whether it's curb-to-curb or door-to-door, the driver is to assist the passenger out of the car at a minimum. Curb-to-curb just means simply getting the individual at the curb and then dropping them at the curb. But you have to help them in the car and out of the car.
Yeah, which this driver didn't do.
He didn't do it at all. Door-to-door is a little bit more than that. It's taking the person from the door of their home to the door of the facility that they're going to.
Now, part of the problem with this whole case was the city, which gave out the contract to Logisticare, and Logisticare, which gave out a contract to Philadelphia Coach, really never followed up on performance, did they?
Yeah, it was the Department of Public Welfare, and they did not at all.
Well, we have Florence here today, and I want to bring her on so she can tell her personal experience with this. So let's do this right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Florence Kulb to the show. Welcome to the show, Florence.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Take us back to that day when you got off the bus. You fell on the ground.
Yeah, I opened the door. He told me to get out. I opened the door to get out. With my second step, I fell and fractured my ankle.
Landed on the ground.
Right.
And he didn't offer to help you? Nothing?
He never got out of the car.
Just drove off?
He stayed there because the door was still open and my son had just come out. My son practically carried me into the house.
Yeah.
And with that, he just reached back and shut the door and left.
Wow.
He never got out of the car, did he?
Never got out of the car.
Yeah. That is truly amazing because their job is to try and help you. You were supposed to be, your service was right to the door of your house, right?
Right, door to door.
And was this the same driver before?
I had him a couple times.
Yeah. Nobody's been able to identify that driver, have they? They know who it is, they're just not saying.
I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah. Then what happened after you fractured your ankle?
Well, my son carried me into the house.
Yeah.
And him and my other son took me to the hospital.
Yeah, and eventually your ankle wasn't able to heal?
No, they kept trying different antibiotics and different things like halos and stuff, and it got infected.
Yeah, and that's why eventually it had to be amputated, correct?
Right.
7 surgeries later.
7 surgeries. Wow, just from falling down, right?
Yeah.
And you were actually going to the dialysis center.
I was coming back from it.
Coming back from it because you go there, what, 3 times a week, correct?
Right.
Wow, what an ordeal.
And I asked him to drop me off in back because I knew I was too weak to do all the steps that we have in front.
Yeah. We were talking before we came on camera here about the egregious behavior of these people. It's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's amazing that knowing the fact that Mrs. Kulb had this problem every time that she'd left dialysis before this had happened, and 7 or 8 times they'd driven her.
Right.
They knew well that she needed that help out of the car.
Yes.
And they just deliberately didn't give it to her.
Yeah, and as a result of the amputation of your leg, you ended up going into the nursing home too,
right.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
How long have you been in the nursing home?
Over 3 years now.
Wow. And you still go to the dialysis center?
3 times a week.
3 times a week. If you had that driver, if I was that driver that drove away, what would you say to me today?
I couldn't say on camera.
No, but what should be done with him, seriously?
There should be some kind of law.
Yeah.
You know, that for your negligence,
yeah,
somebody else lost a limb.
Yes.
You know, and I don't think that's right.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And we certainly hope by you coming on the show today that if anybody else is mistreated, illegally treated, correct?
Right.
That they have a source to go to, because in the beginning you probably didn't think, you know, whether this was a lawsuit or anything.
I didn't.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for Mr. Huber, they would have got away with it.
What do you think of Bob as a lawyer?
Oh, I think he's the best.
Yeah?
As a person and as a lawyer.
Good. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you, sir.
It means a lot to everyone watching this show. Bob, in these kinds of cases, and in all of your cases, when you discover the facts, there's 3 things you can do. You can go to trial, which I would imagine that's what you aim for with all these cases. But then you're presented opportunities to settle, and in the process of settling, you sometimes utilize mediators. Explain to our audience a little bit about how that process works.
You prepare every case for trial because you want to be in a position of strength. But oftentimes it is the best avenue for everybody to try to settle the case. And if you're too far apart, like we were in this case, using an experienced mediator can really help.
Yeah, now we had talked to, before the show a little bit about too far apart. They initially offered, what, $400,000?
Yes.
And when you got a mediator, who you both agreed on, right?
Right.
That mediator, when they were presented all the facts, and this is important because as you prepare to go to trial, you gathered all of these facts. They don't have insurance, there's agency liability, correct?
Correct.
The mediator came up with a figure of $2.5 million, correct?
He did.
When he came up with that figure, what was the defense's side then? What was their position then?
At that point, I think they still didn't want to come that high. They were very reluctant to do so. And in fact, after the first round of mediation, for the first mediation, we left. We weren't even anywhere near one another. It was at that juncture that we decided on both sides that we needed to reevaluate. We went back to the bargaining table in front of the same mediator about 2 months later. And at that point, the defense and their carrier had become much more realistic. And they probably would say the same about us. But in any event, we did end up coming up with a resolution of the case that Mrs. Kulb was very happy with. And because of the fact that she was in the position that she's in on kidney dialysis, she needed to try to get the case resolved as soon as possible.
Yes. Great, you did a great job.
Thanks. We're very happy with the result for her and look forward to helping others.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other people who may need your help in these similar kind of cases. And I want to thank you very much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.